Look at an apologetic approach. This is a tool tonight. It's not exhaustive. Okay, so everything we say tonight is going to be hints to you about what to look for, how to start looking for things. And trust me, you're going to see things I've left out tonight. You say, well, what about this? I'm sure it's going to be there. I promise you, okay? But this is kind of a catalyst lecture to get you thinking in these categories and in this paradigm of creation, fall, redemption. Now, some people divide this up, creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, or talking about the fullness of redemption at the second coming when all things come to their fruition in Christ. But nevertheless, you can do a threefold pattern here, creation, fall, redemption. You say, well, I know this, but there's some ramifications about this, okay? So why are we going to look at this CFR, that is creation, fall, redemption, in apologetics? Well, let me give you an illustration about a friend I had a conversation with. He's an unbeliever, claims to be an atheist. And he likes to think that some of these people like Richard Dawkins and so forth have good arguments against Christianity. And I said, what is it at base level about why you do not believe in God? He says, well, I'll give it to you in short. He said, every day there's 5,000 babies in Africa that die of starvation. He goes, how can God... If God is there, how could God allow that? Now, this deals with the problem of evil and God's sovereignty and providence. But I said, I want to ask you a question. I said, I just can't make sense about why that bothers you. He said, what do you mean? I said, first of all, I want to take it from your worldview. You believe in evolution. There's no God. Survival of the fittest, correct? Well, yeah, species got here through survival of the fittest. I said, now from your worldview, you ought to be happy they're dead. Because there's less people that have to compete with your resources that's going to help ensure your survival. You ought to be thankful. I'm not sure to who, but you should be thankful that they're gone and that it's going to help ensure your survival a little bit more. I said, now, but I want to tell you this, though. From a Christian standpoint, I said, I can look at that and I can weep. Because I know when God made creation, this was not His intention. That this is not right. There's a sense here that I know that something is morally wrong about this. And I said, I can weep over that. But I said, I'll tell you what else I can do too. I can look in the future and I know one day Jesus Christ is coming. And He's going to raise the dead. And when He raises the dead, justice and all recompense will be dealt with at that time in relation to those babies being neglected. Now, what all forms that's going to take place, I don't know, but this I do know, that justice will be served, one way or the other. And see, what I engaged him on there was a creation, fall, redemption paradigm. I said, I can be sorrowful over it because I know this is not what it ought to be. This is what it is, but I know one day what will be. Because how God is going to restore all things through Christ at the resurrection. I said, now here's what I applaud in you. I said, you can't get away from the image of God being in you. I applaud that. As much as you're trying to suppress the truth of God, the image of God is coming out into you. You know that something about this is not right, inherently not right. And I said, but from your viewpoint, I said, if you're going to be consistent, you should be happy and it shouldn't bother you. You should go on about your merry way. But I said, because God's made you, and you know obviously that the Christian worldview is true, you have sorrow over it. And I said, you ought to be able to also have joy if you would look forward to the resurrection of Christ. And so that's kind of the example. He didn't really have anything to say about that. The other guys beside us said, I hadn't thought of it from that standpoint. That you really don't have a basis for grieving over this if you believe in your worldview. So we're going to try to engage them on this creation, fall, redemption paradigm. So what this does, it gives us an overall biblical framework. We know where we stand in the plethora of worldviews today. The biblical creation, fall, redemption model stands out as unique in this. And we know how to understand the totality of reality, not just parts. Sure, you could take a worldview and there's going to be some truth in that lying system, okay? There's going to be some truth in that somewhere muddled, hidden, twisted, but it's not going to be able to account for the totality of reality, okay? This is how the biblical paradigm stands apart in this. So what will you find with this, with people, as they seek to live out their worldview, it's going to lead to fractured living. And an impartial worldview leads to an incomplete ability to defend the faith on our part if we don't understand how creation, fall, redemption frames how we think about reality, ideas, and how people are living things out. And we'll get into some of those questions in just a few moments. So again, a full worldview is able to show the unbelievers the incompleteness of theirs, that is, of their worldview, and their inconsistency with it. And what I mean by that is trying to live it out. Just like my friend, he was sad that babies were dying, but he didn't want a God in there, but yet he was going to be sad that evolution had wiped them out to ensure his survival. Now, that doesn't make any sense with his worldview. And so when we think about the creation, fall, redemption paradigm, we can know what part they are emphasizing or neglecting. Because what I want to say with that is everybody has a creation, fall, redemption paradigm. Okay? I want you to get that. It's not just believers. Okay? Unbelievers have a creation, fall, redemption paradigm that they will live by. And so when you understand the biblical framework of the CFR and you start listening to other people, you can hear them articulate. Are they talking about their view of creation? Now, it may be evolution, or it may be aliens, right? Who knows? But you'll hear them talk about their creation, their fall, and what's going to save it. Okay? So, again, this is going to inform us on where and how to engage them. Oh, they're speaking about something about their view of creation. Now, I can look at them and see where they're going to be inconsistent, where it's not going to explain reality completely, and engage them with the biblical worldview that finds its fulfillment in Christ. Schaeffer talked about this in the point of tension. He says there's going to be a point of tension where they're living in reality and where they're trying to live out their worldview, and it's going to be a headbutt. Just like my friend, his point of tension was he's grieving over babies that are dying early, but he holds to an atheistic worldview where chance is the ruling factor of the day. So you know what I did? I poked at the wound. Here's the point of tension, my friend. You can't hold this, or unless you're going to acknowledge the truth that you already know, that God's there and God has spoken. So what we're going to see, the world has nothing new, only counterfeits. They're going to borrow. Satan's only going to borrow from what God has already said. He's going to twist it, pervert it, deny it, or take part of it and emphasize one part to the exclusion of the other. And we'll look at some of those points too. The non-Christian worldviews are borrowers. That's supposed to be borrowers of Christian capital to make sense and live in this world. I mean, this is especially true of American non-Christians, as they do not understand how much they are living and borrowing on borrowed capital from the Christian worldview. And one area I can think about on that is about women's rights. Go to any country that doesn't have a strict influential Christian worldviews and watch how they treat women. And they want to come and charge Christians for being derogatory, mean toward women's roles. You've not seen anything. If you think we're bad, we're not, obviously. You see how much Christ elevated women in life and so forth. And the Gospels do, and the rest of the New Testament, so forth. Equal image bearers, so forth. Go look at the world without a Christian influence. And so again, these people today who holler about women's rights, they're sitting on Christian capital and seeking to try to deny it. So let's look at this, okay? We're going to spend a lot of our time on this, and then I'm going to give you a few examples at the end. Again, that the examples I give you at the end are just examples. You could do with any idea or philosophy out there, but I'm going to focus more on Westernistic ideas, since that's kind of where we're at, okay? In the Scripture. In Genesis 1 and 2, obviously we see God is center. All reality relates to Him. There's nothing impersonal in this world. Now, I don't mean by that God is everything, okay? But everything in this world ultimately relates back to God. He's the maker. He's the creator to it. God is omnipresent. And so there's not just bare facts out there. They all ultimately relate to their creator, okay? There's a relationship there. God's lordship overall, we see this in a specific doctrine we talk about in the Reformed faith, predestination and election. Hey, there's even counterfeits of predestination and election. We'll look at that. Government finds its start in the nature of God, so to speak. It's intrinsically there in the nature of God. Father, Son, Spirit. There's a taxis, there's an ordering eternally there in the nature of God. That is a governing aspect, okay, in that. Unity and diversity. The great quest of all the Greek philosophers and the philosophers through time is always trying to understand all the diverse stuff out here, but how do you unify it, right? We talk about a universe. We talk about universities, and the word university is simply the combination of the word unity and diversity put together of all the diverse subjects. The overall unity to that used to be theology. Now it's fractured knowledge because why we've left the knowledge of God. But in the nature of God, we have the ultimate unity and diversity, don't we? One God, three persons in that. The thing that has bothered philosophers for millennia is easily answered in the Bible, in creation, who God is. Humanity is originally good. We know this, image of God. Now, the ramification of this idea, and there's many others, okay? Again, I'm just touching on a few things to kind of give us some connecting points here, is correspondence with God, right? We know that when God speaks to us through His Word that we can understand that, okay? But there's a creator-creature distinction. Always has been, always will be. No matter how great man is made in the image of God, there will always be a creator-creature distinction. Again, unity and diversity, we have that in male-female. They're one humanity, but there's a diversity in humanity, right? Male, female, so forth. In the individual, we think about there's the psychosocial aspect, interpersonal dynamics. This is a good psychology, that man was holistic in his inner being, right? There was no inner turmoil, okay? So whatever labels or ideas we want to stick on about man, about what's going on in his inner dynamics, he was at peace, okay? He was together. His psychology was good, okay? Physiologically, good body, all things work properly. Man's a physical, spiritual being. Two parts, okay? He's one being with two parts, okay? And that's going to get into contrast when we look at other worldviews that try to claim that man is one aspect only, like he's physical, but then they really live with the tension of that man's also spiritual, right? They want to believe in a mind, they want to believe in ethics and other things like that, but if it's all just physical, all that stuff's illusionary, right? I believe I have a free will. No, you don't. If you're not a two-part creature, you're not. So there's ontological and functional aspects, that is what man is and what he can do, that we think about. Again, as we talk about some perversions, the world will take one of these to the exclusion of the other, and usually what they want to do is they want to take the functional aspects. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. When you believe in an evolutionary concept of man, you begin to define humanity in terms of ontology, that is what he is in his essence. You'll define man in terms of what he does or how he operates. And Nazi Germany is the perfect example of that, is that humanity got redefined, that if you couldn't do a certain thing, you're to be terminated. And we have that definition in America today. Well, it's not viable. The baby's not viable, or the fetus is not viable. Because why? It's not fully functional. Well, where does that say that that's the definition we should accept about humanity, right? There's an ontological aspect about that baby in the womb that is already intrinsically in the image of God. Okay, social civilization. It's not just man as an isolated island, okay? God made man in civilization. It's not good for man to be alone. He male and female, He created them in the image of God. He made them. Equality and effort, in essence, there are some differences. Hopefully you know that by this age. Again, we have unity and diversity, even in society. Marriage and family as basic unit of civilization. Humanity is not just one person, but it's community. And here's one that could do a lot of study on. Again, I'm not being exhaustive on this, but I just want to give you some things to think about, that these ideas are insipid in the creation narrative. Language. It's analogical. That is, there's some similarity, but not complete likeness, that we can understand God. Because we're in the image of God, there's some correspondence there with us. When God speaks, we can hear God. We can understand God. Okay, that has huge ramifications in that. There's a correspondence with reality. When we speak about certain things, our language is going to match up with that. Why? Because one God who's over all of it, made it all, made us to correspond with Him, but also made us to correspond with the nature and the environment we're made in, and not only that, with the categories He's fit us with to be able to think through. Okay? In relation to His environment, harmony. The T-Rex didn't try to eat man at the beginning, right? They lived in harmony together. Hierarchy, man as the mini-God over creation, so to speak. God's representative in this. Dominion, harness and use creation. There was fruitfulness in labor without thorns and thistles and frustration. You know, you think about how the world tries to account for the futility in life and the futility in work and the things they do. How do they have it with anything to compare with? They don't. Stewardship, care for the garden of the world. Biblical shalom, that means peace with the environment. Okay? So you see these factors, the individual, community factor, man's environment, stewardship, dominion, all these things that are coming into play here. Reality itself is comprised of matter and spirit. There's angels, demons. Well, in the beginning there was angels. Man is a spiritual creature. Matter's good, spirit is good. And this is contrast to the secularism of today, which says spirit is bad because, well, really spirit doesn't exist. Or the Gnosticism of the early first centuries that matter was bad. The Bible actually says both are good. Both are good. There's a hierarchy over creation. Man's to be over animals. He's not on equal with animals. Animals don't have the same rights as man. Why? Because man is a steward over them, a dominion creature over them, over plants, over matter, and even though there is stewardship. Okay? I know I'm flying through this because there's a lot of material to cover, and I'm hoping to get to a point I want to get you to interact with me when we come to the application part, okay? Consistency of nature, a.k.a. laws of science, time, full productivity. You know, at first, man was not going to be limited by time. He was going to be in time, but he was not going to be limited by it. And we know now because of the fall, what? Man's days are numbered on this earth, right? Either until he dies or until Christ comes back. But time is taking on a different factor now. Okay, full productivity, we talked about that. So in all these points, there's points of contact and engagement. You're going to hear people talk about their view of creation in their worldview, whatever their worldview is. A lot of times it's not even a consistent non-Christian worldview. It's amalgamation of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And they're not even sure how it all fits together. They just know, I like this part and I like that part, and they hold different parts together, the inconsistency. But what we know in this is all is in relation to God. I want to emphasize this again. God as our ultimate environment. In Him, we move, live, and have our being. Everything you touch on in life and everything your unbelieving friend touches on in life is God-related. And it's a God-related issue. I don't care what it is. There is no neutral areas out there. This is God's world. You find a universe where God's not at, then it might be neutral. But until then, this is God's reality, and everything is God-related in that. Okay, so the fall we see in Genesis 3. You know this. I'm not going to go through this much with you, but entrance of sin. Genesis 4 through 6 is all about, and so begat so-and-so. He lived so many years, and he died, and he died, and he died. And we see the flood. The world's full of wickedness. God destroys the world. Man seeks to unify around humanity rather than God, and rather than obey God, he disobeys and comes together, the Tower of Babel. But it's just, the early chapters of Genesis are all about the moral failures of man to obey and keep God's word and obey Him and honor Him. So let's think about some worldview issues in this. Everything we've talked about are not what they ought to be. Now, this is big, okay? That word ought. Your friends, your unbelieving friends, will always talk in terms of ought. We ought to do this. Society ought to be that. Individuals ought to be able to do this. Ought. Well, that's a problem for their worldview. Okay? We know things now are not what they ought to be, like the 5,000 babies dying. It ought not be. In an atheistic, secular, evolutionary worldview, that is the way it should be. But what they will do is they'll try to talk in moral categories about oughtness. Society ought to be this way. We ought to think this way. We ought to be tolerant. From what creation paradigm are you getting this and what things were like? Okay? So God no longer is sinner. Romans 1:25 summarizes the whole issue of sin in the Bible. They worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator. What man seeks to do today is rather than having God, the Creator-creature distinction, they will make God equal with nature, or they'll equate God with nature or deify nature. They'll deify the creation itself, the cosmos itself, As Sagan used to say, the cosmos is all there ever was, all there is, and all there ever will be, taken from the biblical paradigm of who God was in that. Because if all there is matter, then all matter is all there ever was or all there ever will be. Okay? Man's basic disposition now, instead of righteousness, is now evil and suppressing of the truth. The world believes in the inherent goodness of man. Okay? Now, we have something what we came from, what we are now in, and we also have a comparison of what we will be. But the world basically says, there is no fault. This is what is, so what is what ought to be. So we believe in the basic goodness of man. No matter how much evil happens. I mean, you look at the atrocity that happened in France just a few days ago. You know what the saying was? We can all get along. In the face of blatant evil, said we can all get along. And so when you think about man, man is today seen as radically autonomous or radically social. So you hear people out there today arguing for radical autonomy. Man should not be bound by anybody. He shouldn't be bound by any governments. He should be a law unto himself. Or, well, the only way we're going to see any hope for mankind is for all mankind to be gathered together in one collective mindset. And so when they say politics is separate from religion, I tell you, all politics are expression of religious commitments. There's not a single political law that's ever divorced from religious commitment. So what happens? It becomes a perversion of the original order. They take one to the exclusion of the other, right? Yeah, man is an individual, but he's not just an individual. He's in a society, but he's not just a society, right? There's a both and there with the biblical worldview in that. Death and suffering is not normative. You know, the poem Red Tooth and Claw struggles with that fact is why do we see such carnage in the world, even in the animal kingdom? I mean, you can watch animal shows and just watch some brutality take place in that. But we can look at that and we can say, that's not normal. That's not what it ought to be. There you go. Great. I want you to get that word. It's not what it ought to be, okay? And one day it's not going to be like that, okay? So every facet of man of creation has and is affected by sin, including the mind. A lot of Catholicism and some Protestants believe that the mind itself is not, everything else is fallen except for man's mind. Well, that's not true. Man's mind is affected by sin, okay? So reason didn't fall, but man's reasoning did, okay? Man's capacity to reason did. Reason finds its ultimate answer in the Logos, which is Christ himself in that. So again, you see today perversions in male and female marriage, manhood being redefined, femininity being redefined, marriage being redefined, so forth. Matter, spirit perversion, one to the exclusion of the other, or denial of one to the exclusion of the other. Unity and diversity, they have no way to account for it a lot of times. They come up with different ways to do that, but anything man can think of to unite the rest of humanity in its various effects. Again, you could take all the things of the creation that we talked about, some of those, and more, okay, and just start seeing how those facets start getting perverted, twisted, okay, in the world. Redemption, we look at Revelation 21:22, and we are going to get to the application of this, I promise. I know a lot of this is probably reviewed, but just hang tight just for a little bit more. Again, we see, again, God back at the center of all reality. Now, God's always at the center of reality, but we're talking about in a worshipful, rightful response. Reunited humanity, the nations are there before God, restored creation, new heavens and new earth. Resurrection of the bodies, reuniting with the soul, the bodies being reunited with the soul. Meaningful history. There's a goal. Where are we going? We know. We're going to the fullness of the kingdom, right? When Christ brings that in and hands things back over to the Father. There's going to be the abolition of death and suffering and unrighteousness in that. All right, so all that said, let's put this in modern day terms that people think in, okay? So you'll not recognize some of these questions, but these are questions to keep in mind, to think about as you think about the CFR of the biblical worldview, knowing that the world has a counterfeit CFR, okay? So here we're going to talk about a few of these things here. Again, the world speaks in ought categories all the time, but why? On the basis of what? We know what it's supposed to be, right? Because we have something we've came from. We also have a ability to look forward and know what it's supposed to be. But when you're in an evolutionary framework or an atheistic framework, what is just what is. There is no ought there. It's just what is. The fall deals with issues related to what is or is not. What it is, it's messed up world. What it's not, it's what's missing to make things right. And the world will talk about these things, right? They'll talk in the terms of how the world is not right, whether it's conservatives in control of politics, or not enough regulation over banks, whatever it is. Okay, what's missing to make things right? So here's the overall questions we're dealing with. Where did stuff come from? Where did I come from? Everybody asks these basic questions, but these are CFR questions that the world will talk about. They may not ask these questions directly. They may, but they think through these issues, or they articulate answers to these questions about what they believe is the answer to these questions, okay? Why are we here? Here's a big one today. What is man? There's no consensus on what man is. There's 150 plus psychologies out there. You can't say there's the field of psychology. You have to say the field of psychologies. There's over 150 fields out there. Carl Jung didn't agree with Freud. Freud didn't agree with this one, and that one didn't agree with that one. It's not like they were unified. And the reason they weren't unified is they could not come to a consensus about what a healthy human being was. They can't even answer a basic question like that. How do you know you've treated me if you don't know what the ideal person is supposed to be about? What is man? What is wrong with the world? How should we live? Ethics. Where are we? Creation headed. What can we do about it? Everybody has an eschatology. Do you know that? Everybody has an eschatology. It may not be a good eschatology, but everybody has an idea about where we're heading as humanity, as a planet. Well, right now we're heading to global warming. The world's going to be destroyed. Right now we are heading toward a more unified working of the nations together, because that's the only thing that can save humanity. We need a new Tower of Babel, right? That's basically what it is. Where are we going? Is there one for me? Creation itself? Humanity? And again, did God really say? The question is, says who? How do you know this? How do you know this is the eschatology for humanity? On what authority? And why should they be the authority? Or should this be the authority? Okay. How do we have unity in all the diversity? This is a question that people seek to answer over and over and over and over. Look at all the diverse nations. How are we going to be united as a humanity across the globe? Here we are as France. We have diverse peoples and different religious groups here together. How are we going to be united together as a nation? Well, we're just going to hug and all get along, apparently, to the postmodern mindset, right? That's what they think. Tolerance is the mantra today, accept diversity, but it doesn't mean that. It means absolute unity with no diversity. So when they use code words like tolerance, that kind of sounds like part of diversity, but it doesn't. It's not. If you really think about it, what they mean is oneness, absolute oneness. That is, you think the way they think. So again, everyone holds to some sense of what is normative, non-normative, and restorative. Okay? All right, so now here's where I'm going to get you to come in and think with me on this. So let's think about the CFR position from an evolutionary standpoint. Okay, I'm giving you some of these here, but maybe you can give me some others. We're looking at creation. Monism simply means everything's from one. Okay, everything's from one. Everything is ultimately one. And again, this is why many go into pantheism, right? Because if everything is ultimately from the same thing, then that means whatever is ultimate, which is the one thing, has to be God, right? So this is why a lot of evolutionary people, if they abandon pure scientific commitments, they will, if they have any sense of religious commitments, they'll tinker with pantheism, especially in light of Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, so forth. But anyways, there's no creator-creature distinction. Okay, anything else you can think of that would fit their creation paradigm, what we came from. We're all the same, right? Everything's one. What's the ramifications of that with the rest of nature? What about animals? Yeah, we're equal with Him.
Well, even in the oneness, is it a material oneness? Is it mind? Is it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And there can be differences, but it's
Mm-hmm.
all essentially going to be.
Yeah, they're eventually. I mean, when you strip the outside of it down, it's going to come down. It's just going to be oneness, right? Matter's all there ever was, all there is, all there ever will be. Okay.
Usually, though, if it's not matter, never mind.
Never mind. Yeah. Any others? But you hear people talk about this when they start talking about a sense of everything is one or going back to one or is part of the one. They're expressing their creation framework. Okay. Now again, it's a paganized idea. Let me go back. Pretend you didn't see that. What's the fall for evolution? What's wrong with the world?
Well, there really can't be anything wrong with the world because it's evolving.
Okay.
There's no one to tell you what's wrong and right. You can't call something crooked unless you have an idea of where a straight line is.
That's right.
Which means you get to do that for yourself, which makes you the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong.
Now that's a surface commitment of theirs, but there is another side to the coin where they do believe there are things that are not exactly right with evolution. So what's the fall?
Well, some of them would say that it can be fixed through right knowledge.
Okay, right knowledge. Okay, well yeah.
Our meddling with nature is what causes it to be not as it ought to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And it is somehow our interaction with the world that creates
The fall.
problems, which is why they're willing to dedicate
Billions
billions of dollars
of-
every decade to
That's right.
preserving the Everglades, which are a transitional environment.
Right.
That's right.
Okay, what else is wrong?
Well, power is the only absolute. The guy that's the most powerful gets to say what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, survival of the fittest, right?
Truth's a matter of opinion. Yeah, but then they have to be answerable to that standard.
Right.
And that's a very difficult thing to accept.
Right. Anybody on the back row want to give this a shot real quick before we jump ahead? All right, let me just give you a few here. Again, we're not evolved enough. That's a problem. Why do we still have disease? We just haven't evolved enough. Why aren't the masses willing to concede power to the elite? Just not evolved enough. You just don't understand enough. We're not integrated enough with nature. You're wasting too much electricity. You're tearing too many mountains up to build roads over them. We got to get back to simple living. There's too much dominion, right? And again, we see the perversion here of the creation mandate here of dominion and stewardship. But what is it? It's radical stewardship to the exclusion of dominion. Okay? So again, remember what it is. It's one to the exclusion of the other, or it's a denial of everything that God says, right? It could take either form of that. All right, so let's talk about redemption. How do you get salvation in evolution? Yeah, right? Hitler was consistent with it, right? Hitler was consistent. He did that.
But they hate him.
What's that?
They hate him.
Yeah, they don't want to be associated with him, right? What's the other ways we find salvation in evolution? How's evolution going to save us, or how can we be saved by evolution?
What's there to be saved from?
Well, we're not evolved enough, or we're not integrated enough with nature. So how are we going to bring salvation? And that's just two examples. Or there are other ways, but
The two basic ways they look at it is external and internal.
okay.
Microscopic, by turning inward, that's a mystical
Mm-hmm.
aspect of it. The other one is telescopic, I guess, and the answer is, like Carl Sagan, the answer is out there. We can cure every problem, illness, disease,
Mm-hmm.
by venturing, or there may be aliens out there that will
Help
help.
us. Yeah, there we go. We'll say by aliens. Here's the thing in redemption for the evolutionists, and it's usually a corporate eschatology. If you watch the debate with Kim Ham and Bill Nye, you can say what you want about the debate, but one interesting point in it, when Bill Nye said, he goes, well, I know I won't be here when we see all these advances, but I'm excited about it. And it's like, why? You're gone. There's no future hope for you as an individual. There's only a corporate eschatology for humanity generically. You see what I'm saying? In the Christian worldview, there's a corporate and individual eschatology that humanity itself is going to be saved, those who are in Christ, but you as an individual will be saved, and you'll retain your identity in that. But evolution offers a corporate salvation. Why? Because the individual ultimately doesn't matter. They're just one little peg on the ladder to higher evolution. Okay? Now, you might try to do things in your temporal life here to try to nudge your life along the way, but the grand scheme, there's only a corporate eschatology in that. And this is why. This is what fuels biological engineering in a lot of mindset today, is we're going to, evolution's kind of peaked, and we're going to push it forward. Okay? And it's also what brings in the idea of social engineering. We have to plan enough. We have to plan our cities out. We have to lay out the grid work, or how we're going to allocate resources and money and electricity and water and the types of housing, types of materials you can use, what kind of car you can drive. We have to help evolution along by social planning. We're going to evolve society. Evolution's got us here. Now we're going to take over the mechanism of evolution, and we're going to use it. Okay? Let's think about the state. I'll give you this. And I talk about government itself, okay? Government divorced, so to speak, from the idea of God. Remember, because government is found intrinsically in the very nature of God. Father, Son, Spirit. There's an ordering there. What is their creation framework in the state, or the statist, I should say, mindset? That is, the one who believes the state is the ultimate issue, force of life. Besides what we have here, man begins to come together for the collective good. So therefore, what you find out is some are better equipped to lead the others, so you enhance the survivability of the collective whole through elitist people. Anything on that? Man believes that, the statist believes that the state was formed or created ultimately because man as a collective whole is better in survivability than the individual as a whole in that. In other words, you could have different resources, different talents. That way you could take care of the poor, ensure the survival, so forth. What's the problem that statists see? What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with humanity in relation to the state? What's wrong with the world in relation to the state? What's wrong with the world as a whole in relation to the state?
In terms of the atheistic evolution.
Okay.
Is that where
Well, yeah, I'm asking, they're going to have various backgrounds with this, but in thinking that the state is the ultimatum for humanity. Politics, basically. Some of the Greek philosophers would talk about this. Plato, they would see that the organization of the state is the key for man's survival in that. What's the fall? What's the issues the state is facing? What's the shortcomings the state is facing? What's wrong with the world? Well, for one, there's probably not enough state. Right? There's not enough bureaucracy. There's not enough governing. There's not enough elitist planners. There's disunity. Too much localized government. You guys there's too much disunity, right? They're looking for unity and diversity. Well, we can't have it when everybody has all their form of local government, local accountability. It's just everybody's doing their own thing. We got to get everybody together on the same page. Okay? This fuels these people. It really does. It's their ideas being lived out. Localized government. Not enough elitist planners. We need more bureaucracy. We need more agencies to carry out more programs, more organization, more social planning, more bringing people in groups under the power of the state.
Forces you to a one-world government mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the state's the ultimate thing. And so what you'll find is it'll start locally. It's like, well, the little cities are not enough on their own, so we got to form a county-wide government. Well, the counties are not strong enough to deal with all the issues. We got to form a statewide government. Well, the states are not strong enough to do everything, so we need a united government. Well, the nation's not strong enough, so what do we need? We need a world government. So it just keeps growing in that, because the state becomes the end-all of all things. And the problem, the fall is that there's too much disunity, okay? Too many independent states, minds, nations out there. We got to get everybody unified in this. We can't get the masses, the dumb masses, to let go of power. They're too ignorant to know what's good for them. And we have to be able to either manipulate them or write laws where they have to conform to it and not let them have a say, because they just really don't know how to run their own lives. Now, this
Sounds like a recent economist that's been speaking for, the Obama administration.
that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And he,
Recently, I saw a lady, a psychologist, who was talking about how parents don't really know how to raise their children,
mm-hmm,
so they need to train professionals
mm-hmm.
to tell them how.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's always the philosophers, right? That's what Plato talked about. He talked about the philosophers who could rule society because they knew and they understood.
So I guess that's why they're wanting them in school at a younger age.
Yeah, you gotta. I mean,
Pre-K.
mm-hmm. Yeah, pre-K, right? From cradle to grave. Just they got to be conformed. We got to do social engineering, right? We got to conform them to think that the state is their friend. Do you think that people who provide your education are going to teach you to think independently of them? No, they're not. There's no way government education is going to teach you to think to be free from the government. They're going to teach you to think that the government is good and that they are here to help. Yeah, that's right. Indoctrination. They want.
they all look the same, too. You see them march and
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so how is the salvation going to bring salvation for mankind? We've kind of mentioned some of these already in talking about the fall, but how is the state going to bring salvation to the world, to people? Indoctrination. And you have to say it monotone. You say it.
And you have to conform or else.
Conform or else. Okay. What else? I mean, there's a million ways they flesh this out, right? Planning to ad nauseum. Regulation ad nauseum. And they're involved, they want to be involved in every sphere of life. Because salvation has to be total. Because reality out there as a whole is affected. And so reality as a whole has to come under the dominion and lordship of the state. Again, elitist planning, commoners don't understand enough, know how to run their lives. Statist predestination. Right? Counterfeits. They must plan your life.
Kind of like from the cradle to the grave.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Every facet, whether it's your health, whether it's your money, whether it's your choices, social planning, social evolution, we talked about this, genetic engineering, it's statist predestination. God's not there to predestine and elect, so the state's going to take that role. They're going to take God's role of predestinating and electing in that. You can't get away from it. Okay? It's there. And we could go on and on other things. I just want to give that as an example in that. Again, what brings about the unity of oneness, the state? It's the thing that transcends over religions, ethnicity, geography. It's able to unite all the diversity. And let me just go ahead and be a prophet here and tell you that Schaeffer said this in the 70s. I'm gonna say amen to this. R.C. Sproul asked him, was getting out of a taxi cab with Schaeffer. And by the way, if you've not read anything by Schaeffer, you must get his collected works and read those. But Francis Schaeffer. Who did I say?
you said Schaeffer.
Oh, Francis Schaeffer. Thank you. But R.C. Sproul asked him before he died in the early 80s from cancer, said he was getting out of the taxi. He says, what's the thing you see coming for America? He says, statism. It's coming. Statism. I'm sorry, not Satanism. But statism is Satanism, but it's just another form, right? Yeah, sadism. No, I'm sorry. Statism. Let me be clear with my hillbilly accent. Statism. here's the thing. In a society that endorses toleration, and we know what that means, the death of truth, there is no absolutes. You can't make absolute claims over other people or say that one way is right and the others are wrong in that. When you have America, a nation as diverse as America, from all the different ethnicities, and really, it's not really just the ethnicities is really a side issue, but it's the cultural issues that come with either ethnic groups or age groups or whatever it is, cultural issues, cultural mindset. It's all over the board. Cultures, America is an umbrella that all these other cultures come and run under and find safe haven under. And it's diversity to the point of insanity. There are only two things that can hold such diversity together like that. One is morals and ethics, a common morality, a common ethic. And we had that early in America. Yeah, there was a lot of diverse people here, but there was a common ethic and morality in the early America. And the other thing is the state. It's the only thing that is powerful enough to keep everybody committed to an ultimate standard because it has the force and power to back it up, and that everybody else will agree with because they're either getting benefits from the state in the sense of what we think was social benefits, welfare benefits, or protective benefits. It becomes the umbrella that everybody hides under, the state. And so because we see a degradation of morality and ethics in America, religious pluralism, which is really polytheism, according to the Bible, is that the only thing left to hold all this together is the state, and that is what's coming. Mark it down. It's coming. Unless God sends revival and reformation and brings the unity back around the gospel and the truth of God's word.
Could that be done through presidential regulation?
No, it cannot. No, it cannot. The president is not the savior, right? The fall is the society is messed up. The president is not going to be the savior of that. I don't care how conservative he is in that. We're at the point that the Lord must save or we perish. So the final future for the statists is one unified world government, their eschatology, a new Tower of Babel. No more territorial fighting because we all belong to each other, right? The world belongs to everybody. No more income inequalities because they're going to redistribute all the wealth, whatever you have left at that point. No more private property, right? There's no reason to covet. Private property's gone. That's why we have coveting, not because of sin in us. It's because someone has private property and I don't. No more sickness. There's going to be universal free health care. See, these are not just political ideas. This is eschatology at work. How are we going to save man from the fall of disease and sickness and not evolved enough yet? We're going to have free health care. And that's going to help us move us along to get us to the point where we can keep everybody healthy enough till somebody in humanity or a group in humanity is evolved enough that we don't need health care anymore. That's eschatology at work. Obamacare is not about just free health care for everybody, so to speak. It's about status control, predestination. But you need the predestination so you can get to the eschatology, right? Isn't that what we need in Christianity? We need God to predestine us. Because of the fall, we're not what we ought to be from creation. We need God to predestine us in the time of the fall to redeem us, to get us forward to the eschatology where we have resurrected bodies, new heavens, and new earth. See, the state's got to do the same thing. They have to predestine, plan, ordain, so that they can get the eschatology of the future that they want. You see how the CFR gives you a point of contact with people? You kind of start talking about things with them and engage them on their CFR in that. And I think this might be the last one I have here. Secular humanism. Man was originally free. What's affected poor man? Well, all these bizarre religions sprung up. Man didn't have science as a way of explaining ultimate reality. Religions helped him explain the ignorance that was in the world or the things that we didn't know that science would later tell us. So what happened? Religious rules inhibited scientific progress for the longest and moral liberty. Okay, now you know what I mean by the word liberty there. That's the freedom to do whatever you want. And a lot of times they mean that without consequence of what they do. So what's the eschatology? What's the redemption paradigm for the secular humanist? The humanist means man is ultimate. He's the end and goal of all things. He's the beginning, so forth. So what's the eschatology? What's the end times, or what's the redemption factor for secular humanism? Now, again, there's a lot of overlap between all these, okay? I get that. There's an overlap between evolution, secular humanism, and the statism. These are all kind of blend together, but I'm just kind of talking about these as a distinctive factors tonight, just to kind of get a little clarity on some of these points. Again, you could do this with Hinduism, Buddhism, any religion. You could do this CFR.
This seems extremely familiar, your language and everything that you've been using so far as everything been one is nearly parallel to what you would hear in Freemason lodges.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they call it, you in order to become a 33rd degree Mason, you have to renounce Jesus or whoever your Savior is in your religion as the one and only.
Yeah.
Because that's individual, it's closed and rigid, narrow-minded.
Prevents unity.
It's superstitious, and you're arrogant by thinking that you know more than somebody else. You cannot be an exclusivist and be a part of this redemption that you're talking about in the world today.
Right. Okay. What else on secular humanism? How's it going to bring redemption? How do they look for a redemption in man? Yeah, that'll be one of the ways, right? We got to let science be king and get rid of superstition. I mean, that's in the new atheist books, you know. Religion is holding us back. It's keeping people in superstition. The only way we can move forward is through progress of science in that. Let me give you a few of these here. Again, this is not exhaustive by any means, but this is just try to get the ball rolling, okay? Get rid of all religion. Science and reason becomes the final authority for all things. Remember our questions? Every debate comes down to what? Says who? Says who? Sexual and moral freedom. Individual predestination. Okay, this is just one example of the things that we see that becomes a counterfeit. Man's the captain of his own ship. I'm the master of my own fate in that. Think about these two. I want to give these two movies as we get ready to close out. I want you to walk me through. Has anybody in here seen the movie Avatar? It's a pretty popular movie. Okay. Walk me through the CFR paradigm of Avatar. What is it? Anybody remember the movie well enough to?
This world in the movie was created good,
Mm-hmm.
fine the way it was, and then the human element, if you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
and comes in and
Yeah.
wants to eradicate it,
Right.
wants to
Exploit it, right? Yeah.
right.
A dirty capitalist.
And I guess the redemption was to expel that human element and get them out of there so that the planet can continue in its preservation and be fine without it.
Yeah, and at the end of the movie, what happens? What are they unified with?
Right, man is unified with this good world.
Yeah, and they all hook into this tree. It's like the limbs come in and hook into their arms, and they're one with nature. It's Eastern religion. It's all is one, in that. What about Star Wars? Everybody here's seen Star Wars, surely? Okay. Star Wars. What's the creation, fall, redemption paradigm in Star Wars? The force is in balance, right? Yin yang. There's good and evil, but they're in good balance. A Jedi comes along who later becomes Darth Vader, throws the force out of balance. So what's salvation? Get the force back in balance, okay? I mean, there's 6 movies, fixing to be a 7th movie on that one concept, maintaining balance in this. Okay, so again, final thoughts here as we close out. This is by no means exhaustive. It's just a paradigm primer. A lot of this could be said on the biblical and non-biblical worldviews. We didn't cover every facet that's laid out in the creation, ought and redemption, ought framework, and then the issue of what is. And I want to say this with the utmost importance. The evolution debate is not a side issue in Christianity. It's the underpinning of the entire West philosophical worldviews of today. It's that big of a monster. Okay? You tear that foundation out, and guess what? The rest of the secular humanism, atheism, statism falls to the ground. Again, the world always speaks in terms of ought categories. You're going to have to ask them why and give an account for this in relation to their CFR. And show them where they're inconsistent. They're not going to be able to live it out. And it's not going to be able to account for all of reality. And this is where you can kind of push them on that point. And where you can show where the Scripture actually gives a fuller explanation on these things. Try as the world may, they cannot get ought from is. They want to speak in ought categories, but all they can talk about is what is. I'll give you another illustration of this. I talked with a man one night, and I was talking to a group of people, and they were asking me questions about the Bible. They found out I was a pastor, and they were asking, who is the giants in the land, and da-da-da, and I was kind of surprised these unbelievers knew this many things about the Bible. But a guy says, he says, are you a Christian? I said, well, yeah. And that's about all I got out. And he says, let me tell you something about that blankety-blank Bible and Jesus and blah, blah, blah. And he went off talking about how Jesus didn't exist, and if he did, he was eaten by dogs in the ditch, and there was no resurrection, and we know there's not a God, and I'm sick and tired of Republicans, and we ought to do this in society, and we ought not be involved in the Middle East wars, and our men are over there, they're raping women, they're doing all these things, and we shouldn't be pillaging all the oil out of the world. And what's he doing? He's talking in oughts. Ought. And you know what I did? After he finally let me have a moment, I said, I said, obviously, I'm going to disagree with you. I think we ought to take all the oil in the world, let America be number one. I said, who cares about the rest of the world? I said, I think our men ought to be able to have as much sexual relations with the women over there as they want. They're so far from home, and they're probably lonely. And I said, we ought to make everybody, when they're born, be indoctrinated by Republican principles. What? He went off, and people are looking at me like, I thought this guy was a pastor, And so I let him finish his raise. I said, because, I said, you've sat here and denied that there's a God. And I said, if there's no God, there's no absolute truths. And I said, if there's no absolute truths, I said, what you've done here the last 7 minutes of speaking, we ought to do this, we ought not do that, we ought to do this, is nothing but opinion. It's just what is. And I said, frankly, sir, I said, not to be disrespectful to you, I said, there's 7 billion people in the world. I said, you tell me and give me a reason why I should believe you and what we ought to do according to your worldview over the 7 billion other opinions that are out there. Because if there's no God to tell us what's true for all people, of all places, of all times, you're just speaking opinion. And he fell silent. And he turned and talked with someone else and decided to ignore the issue. But in that. So anywhere, again, they'll fall under their own weight. They'll be inconsistent. So push them to the point of despair in their worldview. They need to make a defense, not just you making a defense. They need to make a defense also in their worldview. They got to give an account of reality. And somewhere it's going to fall in that. The CFR will give you the categories, the paradigm, the tool to kind of analyze where they're at, where they're coming from, and where you can engage them in that. And so we'll stop there for the night.